6:40 morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne on your TV, on your radio and online.
And it's time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning, Pete Price and former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall. Lovely to see you both. Morning.
Morning.
What are we kicking off with? The cost of living, Pete.
Yep, we are indeed. But before I do, can I just give this to Stephen? I found it before.
Oh, what's
Why being married and working for yourself can help ward off menopause.
Oh.
So just read it for later. Just as you're getting married. Right, so the first...
What a lovely
Thank
wedding
you.
present.
Oh, lovely. Ward off the... It's just like menopause, not
it's
the menopause.
menopause.
The menopause.
Oh, it's Dr.
All right.
Michael Mosley. Oh, he's quite good, yes. You ought to
Right.
read that.
I don't
Just thought it's for private reading, that.
Yes, I don't want the menopause, thank you.
No, you don't. That's why you want to read it.
Right.
Right.
Thank you.
So the golden era of cheap food is over, households are told, which is really interesting. A former Sainsbury's boss has warned that shoppers now face hard choices on what they spend money on. It is worrying, the whole cost of living. I actually am sensible, and I live on my own, and I'm sensible on what I spend money on too. But I also, and I'm not going to be criticised, well, I am going to be criticised for this, but if my fridge is full of food and there's stuff left, I do a meal to use it. Honestly, don't throw food away. I cannot believe the amount of people that buy just for the sake of buying. And this is really telling you that you've got to start thinking about what you put in your fridge or what you put on your table.
It's interesting what he's saying is he's saying it's nothing to do with the pandemic or interest rates or anything, or Ukraine or anything. He's just saying that there was a golden era of cheap food in the last 20 years. We've all got used to it. And actually, it's going to finish. It's going to end. Food is going to get just generally more expensive everywhere.
But the waste is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And people that throw food away. Mum, at the end, are you sensible?
Well, I think it's a generational thing, because I was taught by my mum to cook very basic meals, and she was very good. I'm a little bit rubbish, I have to admit, but it is that sort of using up of leftovers, what you make the following day, planning for the week ahead. And I think it's very easy to be able to just pop into the supermarket on the way home and just think, oh, I'll have that tonight, I'll have that. But I think we need to start planning, because we can't keep relying upon the cheap food, and farmers are going to go out of business if we all demand that potatoes and carrots and all the rest of it are at such a low price. So we need to take a little bit of responsibility for ourselves.
And milk. I mean, dairy farmers have struggled for generations.
Absolutely.
Because supermarkets.
I know a couple of guys that I would guarantee where there will be at 4:45 every single evening midweek. They will be at Sainsbury's waiting for the cheap prices. A lot of people do that now.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Do you get it at home? Chuck it in the freezer. There you go.
It's planning as well. I was never taught to plan, and I'm somebody who occasionally gets to the end of the week, looks in the fridge, and there's food that's been in there for days and I've forgotten about, but I will at least then try and use it up. Yeah,
and I think that's the point, isn't it, is that we need to be a little bit better at that. And I think through the pandemic I was quite good at planning meals because I had time to do so. Back working full time and everything else that's going on, it does slip by the wayside, and you need to be a little bit better and a bit more organised. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to be that little bit better.
And there's some food there that you can see I don't know, ragu or a stew or whatever. You can actually make it yourself, even if you're not a good cook. You can get a slow cooker, and they really are amazing things. You throw anything into it, leave it for 4 or 5 hours.
Somebody in government said something about
a slow cooker,
giving it, the best thing they could do for families is give them a slow cooker.
Yeah, well, I said it on here once. And I actually said, I'm not a government minister.
Maybe you should.
Be. Would you like to be one?
No, but no, I think they're marvellous because you can throw them in, leave it all day, and honestly, it's fun. Put a stock cube in. You don't have to be a cook. You can really do it. But we've got to start thinking like this.
Well, I think we've got a generation of young people who don't like casseroles.
Yes, I know. And my son,
I've tried it on them.
who is sitting outside at the moment, doesn't like a casserole. And it's like, how can you not? It's just everything, and the flavours are so wonderful. But they've grown up not having it and not knowing the joy of sort of stew and dumplings.
We didn't like vegetables. That was our generation. Well, that was my generation. Sorry, I was putting you in my generation. I do apologise. You youngsters. That was our generation. And then now you're saying about casseroles. Amazing.
When we had growing up, my dad was made unemployed and mum was a teacher, but they didn't have a lot of money. We black-eyed bean stew.
Yep.
Because black-eyed beans were cheap.
Yeah.
And you could make a stew. And I have to remember, as kids, we didn't like it.
Yeah.
But it was nutritious and healthy.
And you had to eat it. If you're hungry, eat
cheap.
it.
Yeah.
And cheap. It was cheap.
That's what all of those old stews, like Irish stew, is just lamb and potatoes. But if it's done properly, and as you say, slow, it tastes fabulous.
But isn't it, years ago, before I went into show business, I was in catering, went to catering college, but I had dinner parties. My friends used to take the mickey out of me because I used to either use breast of lamb or belly pork. They are now both sought after joints, but they were flavourful and cheap. My friends, cheap is good.
But that's also the days when you could go to your local butcher and ask for a bag of cheap meat.
Yeah, and you can't do that so much now. I mean, the price of meat is astronomical. But again, we go back to the farmers. So lamb is really expensive, but the price that a farmer gets for a lamb is appalling. It doesn't cover the cost of actually raising that lamb to put it on our plates.
Yeah. It's like the Liverpool woman that went into the butcher's and she went, give us a leg of lamb, and leave the rest of the body on.
Fair point.
Good idea.
Claire, working from home in the Daily Mail, the PM says, get back.
Now, you see, this story is just going to anger a lot of people, and I should admit now that I work from home 3 days a week, and I go into the office for 2 days, and that works perfectly. It works for my boss, most importantly, because, she's the one that requires me in, but it works for the rest of my life. The fact is that I don't have to spend out on very expensive train fares, car parking, and losing 2 to 3 hours of my day travelling. So I think the Prime Minister's comments, and especially the one about all people do is make a coffee and then stumble to the fridge and cut off a chunk of cheese. And he seemed to sort of think that all we ever do is go between the fridge and the coffee machine and actually don't do any work. When I've probably worked harder at home than I do in the office. I get very distracted in the office.
But are you the exception rather than the rule?
I don't think I am the exception. I think the majority of people who work from home do it very, very successfully. Now, there are some areas of the civil service, which we will also come on to, which clearly isn't working. Passport Office, DVLA, the DWP, for example. So they do need to be back in the office. But the majority of people for the last 2 years have dealt with this. Their productivity is up. So I don't understand why the Prime Minister now is demanding that everybody goes back. There are benefits to it, and there are benefits for younger employees mixing and learning from older employees. But for the majority of us, in my small office,
in the bigger picture, cities are having major problems because people aren't going back to work because of the small shops, because of the salons, because of the barber shops, because of the restaurants. They need those people back. There's a huge building in Liverpool now which is supposed to have 3,000 people in it, and there aren't anything like 3,000. All those businesses around were waiting for that to happen. Then sadly we had a pandemic. So there's an awful lot more to it.
But on the flip side of that, and I do understand, working in London, I can see that those businesses will suffer. But my local village, for argument's sake, I wouldn't use for 5 days a week if I was in London, because I would leave before it opened and I would come back before when it had closed. I now use my local shops so much more. The majority of my time is spent going over to local shops and just meeting all the people that I live in the same village with, and using the local shops and the local farmer shops.
But are we going to end up with society being in half of those who can afford, or at least have the sort of jobs where you can work from home, and the other half who have to go into the office? Is that how we're going to end up?
Well, I think
who's the better off?
I mean, I do think it's very difficult to sort of say who will be better off, and it's trying to be turned into a class war, which I really disagree with. And the government came out and said, well, you know, what about people, you know, refuse collectors, nurses, carers, they can't work from home. You know, this is a class thing, but it isn't, because a brain surgeon, a train driver, you know, every industry will have those jobs that you cannot do from home. But I think flexibility has got to be the key. I really, really do.
Well, let us know what you think. GBViews at GBNEWS.uk. I think it's an issue dividing the nation on that one, to be honest. Pete, Claire, thank you both very much indeed. We shall catch up with you a little bit later on.